Some changes do not knock with noise. They arrive quietly, like morning mist touching your skin at dawn, soft enough that others do not notice, yet real enough that you cannot ignore them. Pisces, you are standing in a moment like this, not when everything collapses, not during some dramatic explosion, just one ordinary morning when you wake up and realize the rhythm of your life no longer fits the way it used to. The things you once held on to so tightly begin to lose their weight, not because they were wrong, but because you have changed. You may not be able to name this shift. It has no clear shape, no obvious label, but you feel it in the way you stay quiet longer when old stories come up, in the way you no longer feel the need to explain yourself to people who are not really listening. A small space appears, not frightening, just unfamiliar. And inside that space, a quiet question begins to echo. If I keep living this way, am I betraying myself? Pisces has always known how to adapt, how to soften the room, how to stand in empathy, how to understand others before understanding yourself. But this time is different. You begin to see that your exhaustion does not come from the world, but from trying to live inside shapes that no longer match the rhythm of your own heart. No one is forcing you to change. It is the silence within you that no longer allows you to go back. This change does not ask you to act right away. It only asks you to be honest. Honest about the boredom that shows up without reason. Honest about the sadness that appears when you finally reach something you once dreamed of, yet feel less joy than you expected. Honest about the truth that you have outgrown old choices and your inner world is asking for more space to breathe. You may find yourself speaking less, arguing less, trying to prove yourself less, not because you are weaker, but because you no longer want to spend your energy on things that do not nourish your soul. You begin to choose quiet, not as an escape, but as a way to listen. And in that quiet, you hear your own voice more clearly than ever. A voice that does not rush you, does not judge you. It simply reminds you, gently, that it is time to live more honestly with what you feel. What makes Pisces unique is the ability to sense the invisible currents of life, and this time is no different. You do not need anyone to confirm that you are standing at the edge of a new cycle. You feel it in small reactions, in the way you start questioning meaning, value, and what is truly worth carrying forward. What no longer resonates will fall away on its own. No force required. What belongs to you will remain. Lighter, yet stronger. This quiet shift carries a hidden gift. The right to pause, to reconsider, to choose again. Not to reject the past, but to honor it and move forward without unnecessary weight. You are not losing who you once were. You are simply removing layers that no longer fit, allowing your true skin to breathe. And when you allow yourself to stand still long enough in this moment, you begin to notice something else. Light is finding its way in, very soft, very real. Not a blinding light, but just enough to illuminate the path right in front of you. Step by step, you start to feel less lost inside your own life. Something is being rearranged from the inside out, as naturally as the tide changing direction. And within that flow, your story continues to unfold, deeper, clearer, and closer to who you have always been than ever before. There is a strange moment when you begin to realize you have gone too far in trying to be the easy one, not because you are weak, but because you have grown used to placing other people's feelings ahead of your own. Pisces once believed that if you were patient enough, forgiving enough, if you waited long enough, everything would eventually work out. But time passed, and what remained was not peace, but an emptiness that was hard to name. You did not fall apart. You were simply quietly tired. Maybe you started looking back at the roles you have carried for years. The one who is always there when others need something. The one who nods more often than saying no. The one who endures to keep the peace, who sacrifices to avoid conflict, who stays silent so things do not become complicated. You did all of that well, very well, but deep inside, a part of you slowly began to shrink, as if every act of giving in was a small step away from yourself. And eventually, there came a moment when you no longer recognized the person in the mirror. This ending did not arrive through a big decision. It came through very ordinary feelings. You no longer had the energy to explain yourself. You no longer wanted to repair relationships that survived only because of your own endurance. You began to feel relief at the thought of letting go, even though a trace of guilt remained. But this time, the relief was stronger than the guilt, and that was a sign you could not ignore. Pisces is not abandoning your loving nature. You are simply learning not to trade yourself for acceptance. What leaves your life in this season is not something you are losing, but something that has finished its purpose. The habits that made you doubt yourself, the relationships that required you to become more agreeable than was ever necessary, the beliefs that taught you love means endurance, all of it begins to dissolve, quietly but decisively. There may be days when you feel more selfish than before, but in truth, this is the first time you are being fair to yourself. You begin to pause before giving. You listen to discomfort. Instead of silencing it, you allow yourself to step back without needing to justify why. And in these moments, which seem so small, you are reclaiming pieces of energy you once gave away. This freedom does not make you cold. It makes your heart clearer. You no longer love out of fear of losing. You no longer stay out of fear of disappointing someone. You begin to understand that real love does not require you to disappear. That lasting connection is not built on one-sided sacrifice, and that sometimes saying no is the most profound act of love you can offer to both sides. When the old version of you closes, there is no applause, no dramatic farewell, just a very clear feeling of lightness, like setting down a suitcase you have carried for far too long. Your shoulders relax, your breath deepens, and in the space that has been freed, a new stillness appears, not empty, full of potential. You begin to walk forward with less weight, and that lightness quietly begins to open the way to new awareness where you are not just existing, but truly living in alignment with your own values. And then one ordinary afternoon, with nothing remarkable about it, you suddenly realize you are seeing the world through a different pair of eyes. Not because the outside has changed, but because inside, you have finally become still enough to see clearly. After setting down old burdens, after no longer trying to be the agreeable version others felt comfortable with, Pisces begins to hear a familiar heartbeat that had been forgotten for a very long time. It is the feeling of being yourself. No adjusting, no shrinking, no asking for permission. This awakening does not arrive with grand declarations. It comes through very human moments. When you realize you are no longer moved by vague promises, when you no longer feel the need to explain your worth to anyone, when you begin to feel uneasy with things you once accepted, not because you have become difficult, but because your inner standards have shifted. You no longer want a life that is just safe enough to avoid pain. You begin to long for a life worthy of what your heart is capable of giving. Pisces has always been sensitive, but now that sensitivity no longer makes you vulnerable. It becomes a finely tuned compass, guiding you through turns that logic alone cannot fully explain. You start trusting small signals, a quiet discomfort when facing a choice that appears safe, a gentle warmth when imagining a new direction, even if it is still unclear. Your intuition is no longer drowned out by the fear of disappointing others. It is heard, it is respected, and because of that, it becomes clearer than ever before. Perhaps for the first time in your life, you allow yourself to think differently about your own value, no longer measured by sacrifice, no longer defined by how much you can endure. You begin to understand that true worth does not need to be proven through suffering, that you deserve love in its fullness, that you deserve to be compensated fairly for your abilities, that you deserve a life where you are not always placed last. And once that belief takes root, the way you move through the world begins to change as well. You become more selective about what you allow into your life. Relationships that do not respect your boundaries start to feel distant. Environments that constantly make you question yourself lose their appeal, not because you are turning away from the world, but because you are turning back toward yourself. And strangely enough, when you stop seeking validation from the outside, you begin to attract experiences that reflect your true self more accurately. In this moment, Pisces no longer needs anyone to say, "You are good enough." You feel it in the way you stand steady during difficult decisions, in the way you say yes to opportunities that make your heart stir, and no to familiar paths that no longer feel alive. A quiet confidence is taking shape, not loud, not performative, but deep and enduring. It comes from surviving yourself and stepping forward with more truth in your hands. And as you continue walking with this new awareness, without rushing, without hesitation, simply listening and trusting, life seems to respond in subtle ways, as if when you finally recognize your true value, the world adjusts itself to reflect it back. Some doors no longer need to be knocked on. Some paths open in silence, and you step into them not as someone asking for entry, but with the calm presence of someone who knows they belong there. One morning, you wake up and realize you are no longer carrying that familiar heaviness, not because your problems disappeared, but because the way you stand in front of them has changed. Before, whenever something felt incomplete, you would turn inward and ask yourself where you went wrong, where you were not good enough, who you had disappointed. Now, you still reflect, but without the harsh gaze. You look at yourself the way you would look at someone who has walked a long road and deserves to breathe a little easier. This rebirth begins quietly. It starts the moment you allow yourself to stop apologizing for having legitimate needs. The moment you admit that you are tired, that you need space, that you need to be prioritized. Guilt once clung tightly to Pisces, almost like a reflex. But now, each time it appears, you no longer rush to obey it. You listen, and then gently set it aside, like placing down an object you no longer need to carry. You also begin to look directly at your fear of abandonment, not to fight it, but to understand. When it first took root, perhaps very early on, You learned that to be allowed to stay, you had to be agreeable, you had to endure, you had to give more than you received. But now, as you stand more firmly within yourself, that fear slowly loses its grip. You understand that what truly belongs to you will not leave, just because you stop pleasing others. And what leaves, when you live more honestly, was likely never built on solid ground to begin with. Your life energy returns in a very different way, not as reckless excitement, not as the urge to do more, to prove something. It comes as a steady, warm current, one that makes you feel whole, even before everything is complete. You care for your body more gently, not out of fear of loss, but out of respect. You tend to your inner world with greater care, choosing carefully what is allowed to remain there. And from this place, peace is no longer something you chase. It becomes something you carry. The most noticeable change is that you no longer need someone else to confirm that you are on the right path. Before, every decision, big or small, carried the desire to be validated. Now, you listen to feedback, but you do not let it define your worth. You begin trusting a very quiet steadiness inside, a feeling that does not need explanation, yet always knows where you stand. The deepest form of validation comes from one thing alone. You no longer abandon yourself when it matters most. Others may see you as calmer, more selective, less inclined to explain, but inside, you are more alive than ever. Every choice has weight. Every step is intentional. You no longer rush to match the rhythm of the world. You allow the world to adjust to your rhythm. And within that calm, there is a strength that is clear, that is real, and that does not need to be displayed. As you continue walking with this new energy, you begin to understand something simple yet profound. Everything you once searched for outside yourself, safety, love, a sense of enough, begins with how you treat yourself. When you acknowledge your own value, life responds with experiences that mirror it back. As if when you stand more upright from within, the road ahead opens wider, brighter, and invites you forward with a gentle, steady trust. And then you begin to notice that the world around you no longer feels still the way it once did. Not because it suddenly changed, but because you changed the way you step into it. Once your inner world is rearranged, once you are no longer carrying the fear of needing to please, choices that once felt blurred start to come into focus. Pisces is no longer moving on autopilot. Every step now feels chosen, not pushed. It may be a work opportunity that appears almost by accident, yet touches something you have long desired, but never dared to name. It may be a financial direction that excites you and makes you hesitate at the same time because it asks you to trust your own ability instead of clinging to old forms of safety. Or it may be a relationship that arrives quietly without grand promises, yet carries a very different feeling. Not the feeling of having to try harder, but the feeling of being yourself from the very beginning. Before, every crossroads made you hesitate. You feared choosing wrong. You feared disappointing others. You feared losing what you already had. Now, fear no longer sits at the center. You still consider. You are still careful. But your decisions no longer come from lack. They come from inner fullness. You do not choose because you need to be saved. You choose because you want to build. Pisces begins to realize that new paths do not need to resemble any template you were once taught. They may be smaller, slower, or completely different from what others expect. Yet they bring a very clear sense of stability. Each day is no longer about enduring, but about placing one brick at a time. Sometimes you do not see results right away, but you can feel the foundation forming, steady, and truly your own. Old cycles begin to close in the most natural way. You are no longer pulled toward familiar situations that drain you. You no longer repeat choices that once made you doubt yourself, not because you are avoiding them, but because they no longer match the frequency you are living at now. And when you stop responding to invitations from the past, they quietly step aside, making room for experiences that actually nourish you. What stands out most is that you no longer need everything to be clear right away. Before, you needed certainty before taking a step. Now, you allow yourself to move one stretch at a time, trusting that the path will reveal itself. When you are fully present, a new patience forms within you, not passive waiting, but a quiet trust that what is being built needs time to take root, and you are willing to give it that time. You begin to look at the future, not with anxiety, but with calm curiosity. Not everything is easy, but it is meaningful. Not everything flows smoothly, but the feeling of being lost is gone. You know where you are going, even if you cannot yet see the destination, and that inner clarity makes every step feel more grounded. As you continue walking this new direction, one truth becomes very clear. Life no longer asks you to repeat old lessons. You have learned enough. You have grown enough to choose differently. And within that choice, there is a quiet knowing that what is coming is not here to test you further, but to walk beside you on a longer, deeper journey where each day contributes to a life built from your true self. And at some point, very naturally, you realize you no longer have to try to become someone else. Not because you are perfect, but because you have stopped resisting yourself. Pisces stands here now in a very different state, more grounded, but not rigid, softer, yet no longer easily swept away. You begin to live at your true rhythm, not speeding up to keep up with anyone, not slowing down to wait for anyone. Just right. This version of you is not loud. It does not need to prove anything. It does not need to be displayed. But somewhere deep within, there is a very real sense of freedom you no longer love. Out of fear of loss, but from conscious choice, you give because you want to, not because you are afraid of being left behind. You stay because you are nourished, not because of habit or obligation. And if it is time to leave, you do so calmly, without resentment, without blaming yourself any longer. The way you choose has changed as well. No more decisions born from lack or the need to be filled. You choose what aligns with your values, even when that path is not widely understood. There are days when you move slowly, days when you stand still, but there are no longer days when you feel lost inside your own life. This clarity does not come from having every answer. It comes from trusting your ability to self-correct, to adjust, to realign. The way you live each day becomes lighter. You no longer force yourself to be strong all the time. You allow yourself to be tired, to be sad, to rest. And that permission is what makes you enduring. You care for small things, a nourishing meal, a full night of sleep, a quiet moment that is not interrupted. You begin to understand that life is not measured by major milestones, but by the feeling of being in the right place within each moment. The Pisces you are now carries the wisdom of everything you have lived through, but is no longer bound by it. You do not reject the past. You honor it. Every scar taught you something about boundaries, about value, about how to love without losing yourself. And now you carry those lessons as provisions, not as weight. That makes your steps lighter without making them careless. You may never notice the exact moment you become who you were born to be, because it does not arrive with applause. It arrives when you look back and realize you are no longer betraying your own feelings, when you no longer need anyone else to confirm that this life has meaning, when you feel whole, even on the most ordinary days. That is when you understand this rebirth has completed itself in its own quiet way. And if there is one thing worth carrying forward after everything, it is the gentle trust you place in yourself. Trust that you can listen. Trust that you can choose. Trust that you are worthy of a life built from inner truth. The road ahead will still hold challenges, but you no longer walk it with a trembling heart. You walk with full presence, with just enough light to guide each step, and with a quiet, enduring belief that you are living not perfectly, but truly as yourself.